Okay, so now we want to make sure that we don't need the whole application just being in one app.ts file. Yeah, so for that reason we need to set up our structure. We need to set up, let me increase this one a bit. I believe this is more visible. We need to set up our project in a manner that at least we can have that organization. Yes, so we will be setting up it like this. Let's just say we have our core. The whole code base will go in our core. You can call this core, you can call this app, you can call this any name that you want, but inside it now we have two folders. Like we have the presentation layer, yeah, and then we also have the state manager, or you can call it state. I'll explain what they are: state management, state, but let's just say state manager. Yeah, and let's conform to the pattern of underscore. So presentation layer, like there's this thing called clean architecture. If you're familiar with clean architecture, you realize that what it recommends for is that you have to make sure that your presentation, like whatever the users see, like for example this UI is a presentation layer. Like the users will never need to know whether this one is a view, whether it's a text, for example here, welcome to React Native, whether it's a component, whether it's no, like presentation is presentation. It should not be directly tied, it should not be tightly coupled with your logic. Yes, and for your logic is a state manager. State manager, as it, think of it as how you get to actually mutate data and present data to the presentation layer. Presentation layer, yes, it may do very minimal tasks. For example, like a very simple calculation. It should, think of it this way: think of this as the engine of a car, and then think of this as the body of the car. Like the engine is what like will carry, like any engine can drive any car. Yes, it is irrespective of the size of the car. For example, if you have a small car, it can be driven by a large engine. If you have a large car, it can be driven by a large engine. So the presentation layer is the look which is completely independent of the state, and they should not be tightly coupled. By that, when you look of the solid principles, you have to separate them, like segregation. You separate and make sure that if, for example, tomorrow you decide let's change the state, like the UI should not actually break, like the size of this section like should not break. Those are the things that I'm talking about. So inside here we'll have presentation, and in the presentation layer, that is where we have like folders. For example, we said like we are going to break our project into users and into like an authenticated user. So let's create those two folders. So we have the user folder, and then we have the auth folder. But remember, applications, they grow. For example, you realize, wait, we need to refactor this feature that is going to be needed, and a classical example is a toaster. You can use a toaster in the auth section, and you can use a toaster in the user section once the user has been logged in, such that you will need something called, maybe for example, shared folder. So the shared is where like all your shared components, all your shared logic, all your shared functions, they will sit here. All your shared constants, they will sit here, such that both users, like the users who are logged in, the users who are logged in and the users who are not logged in, they can both enjoy. Rather, you don't need to duplicate code, and that is the single responsibility. So here in the shared folder, we create one for components. All our shared components will go here, and then again we add another, for example, utility. So utility folder, whereby you have things like functions for changing the date, functions for transforming text into capital cases, functions for doing something, and so forth. That is how we are going to be having our structure. Then the same goes to the state manager. Like you realize that here in the state manager, we actually have a user folder to manage the state of the users once the users have logged in. And then here we also have another folder for the shared. Why? For example, we may need like to share maybe a token. We may need to share maybe the steps that the user are following. Has the user reached this step? Has the user reached this step? Has the user reached this step? Again, it is not a must, it is more of an option. You can decide, let me have a shared folder. Yes. Finally, we have another one for the auth. So you may wonder, like, why have them like relating? Isn't this like tightly coupling them, like user auth? No, you can just have one, like maybe you decide I'll have just one file for all of my actions, I will have one file for all my reducers, I'll have one file for, and so forth and so forth. But that will really grow, and what you are trying to avoid is something like having everything at the same place, because maintaining that code base, it will be so tricky, mostly when you are working with teams. So in such a case, I'll recommend like break everything down. And again, React recommends that you have that, what is it, like the most atomic version. Be very atomic. Think of it in the smallest and the most minimal, yeah, that you can get. So in this case, like we have three possible business cases, like business logic for auth and user, and again auth and user, but shared is more of a decision. Yes, like you can share something in both cases. So I think that is enough. So we go ahead and we say, okay, now our auth folder in the presentation, we can have multiple screens. We can have, for example, the landing page, we can have the sign up, we can have the login, we can have the reset password, we can have them in a manner that is really dynamic, in a manner that we want, in a manner that meets our needs. So that is up to you. Yeah, that is completely up to you. You can say, let me have just one file, for example, and we'll see. You can decide, I'll just have one large auth file, and then in this auth file I can have a view, separate them by views. For example, a user clicks a button, they go to this view, a user clicks a button, they go to this view. It's totally up to you. However, I like separating them. I like, again, as we said, make everything as atomic as possible, so that auth never knows user exists. And the same goes to, like, for example, we have a login screen and we have a sign up screen. The same way, login doesn't know about sign up. They are only connected through routing. Yes. So what about routing? In that case, you have auth with its own routes. So we can have here routes.ts, a routes file that will dictate for us the routes for the auth and those things that are in the auth path. So for example, in this case, as a user, I log in, and then I am able to view this and this. But before I log in, what should I see? Like, for example, auth will have a landing page, or maybe a wrapper. You can think of it, maybe let's call it main, or index. Let's call it index.tsx. Switch will stand for the auth index page. So for example, when you go to google.com, or even maybe YouTube or Facebook, that is the index page. And then inside this index is where we will be having the routes nested. And then these routes that are nested, now they are the ones that are going to decide the path that the user is going to take. So the same applies to the users folder. So in our case, we are just going to have one simple home page. Yes, and that home page is, for example, let's call it a dashboard, or even home, let's call it dashboard, where the users can see all their journals and all those things. However, as we saw, we have different views, like we have different pop-ups. You have this pop-up, you have that pop-up. So in that case, like, we'll have to have, again, a folder components. Remember, make sure that you break everything down as much as possible. Everything should be very atomic, such that it's so easy for someone to even understand your code. So here in the users in the user dashboard, notice that because we just have one path, one route, which is a dashboard, which is the main, we don't need to have maybe a routes at this point. But if you are going to add more routes, additional routes, for example, dashboard, profile, maybe payments page, maybe if you are working on a social media application, you have view for friends, things like those, you are going to just create them like users, dashboard, / again profile, things like those. But for our case, everything is going to be within just the dashboard. The users, they just work within the dashboard. They don't need to work like on so many things. So I believe that is enough for this video. It's just the setup, and again, feel free to customize this as much as you want. It's not a must that you rely on the setup that I'm defining here, but remember one thing: be very atomic, break everything down as much as possible. Make sure that your components, they are not related in a tight way, like they are not tightly coupled, so that at least you have an easy time even maintaining your code base. But if it gets to that point where you are over breaking down things, yeah, it gets to that point where you want to break this down. I break it. No, like, don't divert too far from your business logic. Don't overthink it. Don't over engineer like what needs to be done. Just think of it in such a way: okay, I want to break this thing down. How beneficial will it be? Will I just be moving logic from one place to another? And again, break the things that are going maybe to be reused later on. For example, our components here that are shared, you can have the components that are shared here, you can break them down, because think of something like an input field. You have input fields everywhere in your application. You don't want to go on and code them, each and every one of them. You just need to have like one, and then you pass in the parameters, you pass in the styles, and everything will be handled for you. So yes, I believe that's it. So let's see. Hopefully this helps you. So let's see where we'll start off from next time. So hopefully, like, the next step, we are now going to be breaking this down. We break this app.ts down. We remove everything that we don't need. We start from the bare bones, like we start from scratch, and then we continue from there.